Hey everybody, Brant Frost again. Hope y'all are doing well. I'm joined again by David Pietrusza, the author of some of the best books on American presidential campaigns in history. Indeed, he's America's foremost living historian of American political campaigns and arguably our greatest historian of American presidential politics. He's written some fantastic books, including 1920, the year of six presidents, 1960, the year of three presidents, 1948, 1932, and his latest book, 1936, FDR's Landslide and the Triumph of the Liberal Ideal, was released just this month. It's in all bookstores, and you can also get it at his website, davidpietrusza.com, and you might be able to get an autographed copy there. I encourage you to get a copy, give it as a Christmas gift, get an extra copy. It's excellent, and it's got some excellent parallels for what we are dealing with today. You see some interesting parallels. It's been said that while history does not repeat itself, it rhymes, and you see a lot of that. One interesting parallel to in the book that David goes into is one of the most unique characters in all of American political history. A man who shot up like a rocket onto the national scene and became a man of such influence that Franklin Roosevelt, no small political master himself, called this man one of the two most dangerous men in America and ranked this man of the two slightly more dangerous than the other. The other was Douglas MacArthur, and the man we're going to talk about with David right now is governor of Louisiana, Huey Pierce Long. And I'd like to begin by asking you, David, do you think a man of the unique characteristics and ability of Long and the dynasty he built, the political machine, do you think that was unique to Louisiana? Or do you think you might have been able to do that in a state like Mississippi or Arkansas?
Well, oddly enough, the closest figure to Long, contemporaneously to him, and maybe period, is in a state which is nothing at all like Louisiana or the antithesis of the Southland. It's Floyd Olson, who was the governor of Minnesota. And he had started out as a district attorney there, and is a very, like Long, a radical guy economically. Unlike Long, he's willing to play, well, he plays footsie with the mob up there. And you don't think of the Minnesota mob, but there certainly was one up there, and the Twin Cities were notoriously corrupt. And you also had, which you cannot find this. I don't think you can find this in even Huey Long's history, where his opponents in the press are simply rubbed out, murdered. There is not just one, but two crusading newspapermen, and they are rubbed out totally gangland style, like in some 1932 movie starring Jimmy Cagney or Edward G. Robinson. Now, like
or House of Cards, or in our modern world, House of Cards, the Netflix show. Frank, people think Frank Underwood is this impossible caricature. Well, Floyd, there was a man like him in the 1930s, Floyd Olson in Minnesota, who, and you'll tell us, I'm sure, more about him and also about his downfall. As another thing about Franklin Roosevelt, he was an incredibly lucky man. Within 1 year, two potential great rivals of his both exit the political scene in surprising ways.
Both Long and Olson are biding their time. They want to be president at some point or other. Long is going to run in 1936 as a spoiler candidate. Olson thinks 36 is too early, and also he's had a much better relationship with Franklin Roosevelt. If you don't think Franklin Roosevelt will make a deal with the devil, well, he will. He tells Jim Farley, the big Democrat honcho, national chairman, New York State chairman, postmaster general, dispenser of patronage, you guys support Olson in Minnesota, even though he's running on this Democratic farmer labor ticket. It's an offshoot of the real Democratic Party, but there is also a Democratic candidate running, but he's an Al Smith guy, and Smith and Roosevelt are on the outs. So Franklin Roosevelt is more than willing to support an absolute scoundrel like Olson. Olson doesn't get to run in 1940 because in 1936, well, his stomach has been acting, and before you know it, it's a raging stomach cancer, and he's dead right around the time of the election. So he goes out, and he's largely forgotten by history. But Huey Long is not. I mean, Huey Long is he must think he's going to be president or wants to be president from about the age of 6 or something. And by the time he is courting his wife, and he's just a cottonseed oil salesman making the rounds in the boondocks of northern Louisiana, he's confiding to her. It's like, well, I'll tell you, Rose, I'm going to be elected to some minor statewide office, and then I'm going to be governor, and then I'm going to be senator, and then I'm going to be president of the United States. And she said, it would just give you chills to listen to this. He knew exactly what he wanted to do, and he was an absolute nobody. And he accomplishes all those things. And from the beginning of it, he's running against the big guys. He's running against Standard Oil of Louisiana. He wants to tax them. He wants to have them pay or at least issue bonds and borrow to improve things in Louisiana, because Louisiana has like no paved roads. It has no bridges going over the Mississippi. The kids don't have free school books, and he does all of these things and more. And people say, well, yes, he does it, but he's so crooked about it and so corrupt. And he answers those charges and says, why sure, people say we have the graft in Louisiana, but in other places they have the graft, but they don't have the highways. You at least have the highways here. So he's not shy about that. He gets into situations where he is basically strangling the powers of local governments, up to and including the state capital, Baton Rouge, and the big city, New Orleans. There are armed.
And he's doing this because his political enemies within the Democratic Party control those strongholds.
That's right. There are old organizations there, and he hasn't quite dynamited them out. but I think that's a phrase he would use, that I'm going to dynamite these guys out. And they ring the state capitol, they ring the streets of New Orleans with sandbags and machine guns and guys with National Guardsmen versus New Orleans police officers. So it gets very ugly. And to show how it's obsessed he is with maintaining control of Louisiana, it's this: he's elected to the United States Senate, and he doesn't go to Washington. He had a lieutenant governor he thought he could trust, but they break just about this time, and Long does not want to turn over the governorship to a man he can't control. So he just sits there in New Orleans and in Baton Rouge as governor until he can maneuver things. And how he maneuvers things is quite ingenious, because he's very smart. They say he's absolutely brilliant. He's well read. He may talk like some guy from out in the piney woods of northwestern Louisiana, but he's sure enough brilliant, actually. And the lieutenant governor gets tired of waiting around, like, hey, you got elected to the Senate, you got to leave, I got to be governor, right? And he proclaims himself to be the governor. And then what Long does, he says, well, if he's proclaimed himself to be governor, he's forfeited. He is no longer the lieutenant governor. And if he's no longer the lieutenant governor, and guess what? He's not the governor either. And he wins that in the courts, and then puts a childhood friend of his in named O.K. Allen, who is totally pliant. And they said that one day a leaf blew out into the window of his office, landed on his desk, and Allen thought it was a bill and signed it. But Long goes to Washington, where he becomes sort of a nuisance, refuses to have any committee work, which is not unique, because Senator Bora of Idaho, another one of these characters who was very famous at the time, really didn't do much committee work either. But Long says nope, and he doesn't cooperate with anybody. But he does support Franklin Roosevelt in 1932, but very soon after that breaks with him and puts forward a plan of share our wealth, has millions of people in these share our wealth clubs. He's going to hand out big bucks to everyone by taxing the rich. And it is actually in response to Long's program of taxing the rich that Roosevelt puts in his own tax the rich budget plan in the Congress. And you see this on several big occasions where Roosevelt acts only in response to other things going on in the country, whether it's that or Social Security or wages and hours bills, which he answers with the National Recovery Act. So it's Franklin Roosevelt is now he's now got Huey Long breathing down his neck, because Long wants to run for president in 1936, not to win, but to punish Franklin Roosevelt, knock him out of office, and to put the Republicans in by drawing off enough votes in key states. And then Long's theory is the Republicans are going to mess this up even worse than Herbert Hoover did. And in 1940, the country is going to be clamoring for me to come in on a white horse and take over the federal government. Unfortunately,
do you think Long wanted to run himself, or to find someone who would be his front man to do it?
He named about 9 or 10 people, mostly United States senators, a number of whom their own mothers wouldn't recognize, and certainly we wouldn't recognize their names now. But one of them was Senator Bora, who was a very progressive, maverick type of Republican. He would have backed him probably. He would have, it's better to get someone else to do your dirty work in a suicide kamikaze mission like that. But he is back in Louisiana in 1935 on the floor of the legislature, dictating to the legislature what bills they're going to put forward, what enemies of his they're going to punish, one of whom is a judge, Judge Pavey. And what they're going to do is redistrict him. And Judge Pavey's son is a Dr. Seymour Weiss. And Long is walking through the corridor of the state capitol in Baton Rouge, and Weiss comes out from behind the shadows and plugs Huey Long. And Long will be dead within a couple of days. And that solves that problem for Franklin Roosevelt. But, it doesn't really end the story of Huey Long, because the Long dynasty continues. His wife, I think, goes into the Senate for a brief while. And his brother, who is Earl Long, there was a Julius Long also who was very active. But Earl Long is remembered as a governor who was, I would say, clinically unbalanced, and was, as I recall, was actually institutionalized at some point. You may remember from about probably 20 years ago now, there was a movie about Earl Long made, and
with Paul Newman playing Earl Long.
Newman, right? And the fellow who made Bull Durham, Ron Shelton, made that movie. I had the pleasure of sitting behind Ron Shelton at the screening of that, and talking to him briefly. And the story was of this crazy governor and his stripper girlfriend. There was a colorful guy. There was a colorful family. But then you get Huey Long's son, Earl Long, or not Earl Long,
Russell
Long, who was a very long time United States Senator.
38 years.
And was almost the antithesis of Long, because he was just a senator. I mean, he was not colorful at all. He's not colorful. He wasn't crazy. He was probably one of the more powerful senators down there.
He was chairman of the finance committee for many, many years, and generally was, from my understanding, was generally perceived as not only a friend to the oil business, which was so important to Louisiana, but a friend to business in general. No one would have ever accused Russell Long of being a wild-eyed liberal like a Hubert Humphrey, let alone a George McGovern or a Eugene McCarthy.
I wouldn't classify him as a conservative. He was sort of a, moderate in between, as they still had from the South at that point in time.
But of course, Long's other protege, his Speaker of the House, was also go to the Senate in 1936, taking his seat.
Yes.
Russell held the other seat starting in 1948, the other seat, but the seat that Huey actually held was held by his longtime Speaker, Allen Allender, who served for 36 years in the Senate until 1972, when he retired and was succeeded by Bennett Johnston. But either a Long protege held both United States Senate seats from 1948 to 1972 concurrently, and from one of them from 72 to 86, and before 48 for 12 years before that. I don't know if any other politician has had that much influence, particularly in such a short life. It should be remembered that Huey Long was born in 1894 and died, if I recall right, he was either born in 1894 or 1892, I believe it was 94, and died in 1935. So he was barely over 40 years old, and yet in such a short span of life, he had such an incredible impact on American politics and on Louisiana politics. He died. Let's put it this way: he died. He died 3 years younger than the current governor of Florida is right now. The current governor of Florida is 44. He Long accomplished all he did in less time than the current relatively young governor of Florida has been alive. And it gives you an idea. Gives you an idea of what he did in such a short period of time. And he did it without having to have the mob murder anybody either.
No. And I left out the main movie about the Long family, which is All the King's Men, starring Broderick Crawford in the late 1940s. And I think Crawford won the Academy Award for that performance.
Do you think that's why Long is more remembered today than, say, a Floyd Olson, because of the books and the film All the King's Men, or do you think it's something else?
Well, yeah, the Robert Penn Warren novel upon which that film was based certainly is a hell of a starter. Just like Citizen Kane helping people remember Hearst. If they're not even big history fans, they've heard of the movie, and it's like, oh, okay, that's that Hearst fellow from history, the history we ignore most of the time. But with Long, I can't think. I've never seen any video of Olson, and Long is just so damn entertaining. And the biography, which we were talking about before, in the around 1970 or so, T. Harry Williams's, it was just magnificent. Also, there was which I think was the best work Ken Burns ever did, was the biography he did of a documentary on Huey Long's life. And I think one of the things that made that so strong, I've been a talking head. I'm a talking head now. But I think a lot of these documentaries really rely too much on the talking heads. And if you can get the people who were there, that's what's really fascinating. Like the movie Reds with Warren Beatty was a terrible movie, but when they interviewed people who were like 100 years old, Hamilton Fish or some communist or whatever, and that was the most interesting part of the movie. And the documentary that Ken Burns came out with had just an incredible number of people who not only knew Long, like we met him twice in the bayou, but who were his associates who knew him very well or who hated him, like Hottie Carter's mother, but and to see her still hissing venom about the man was riveting. So if your viewers haven't seen that, you can get a hold of that like on Prime or something like that, and it's well worth watching.
It is. I've seen it, and it is interesting too that because of another thing that that about Long that has endured is he had much more. He was on television and radio much more, and now that everything is being put on the internet, the things that he said that were recorded have come to us. I'm pretty well read about American politics, and although I knew who Floyd Olson was, I did not know, for example, that he had these connections to organized crime, and I had never seen anything that he had spoken or written or said on the radio. Whereas Long was on the radio very often. There are these interesting clips of him, newsreel cameras of him gesticulating very, clearly as he's making very emphatic gestures as he's making his point. And some of the things he said with the Share the Wealth program, which he launched, but also when he was running for governor, have come down to us, like when he made that speech when he was running for governor about talking about the legend of the local young woman who Evangeline, who was waiting for her sweetheart who never came, and it's a story. It says, "But Evangeline's tears lasted but one lifetime. Your tears have lasted for generations. Where are the schools you have waited for? Where are the roads? Where are the bridges you have waited for? And he says, will you give me the chance to dry the tears of those who still weep here?" That's strong
that
stuff.
moves me. That moves me. I can only imagine what it did to those people.
There's a real amazing. There's every so often someone comes along who really shows you how to use the written word and the spoken word to great effect. And if Long had been born in New York or Ohio or Illinois instead of Louisiana, he might well have become a figure remembered in American politics, or a president in the tradition, in a like a Roosevelt or a Churchill. The iconic phrases that we associate with a Roosevelt or a Churchill might well have come down to us from a Huey Long, because he definitely had the gift of rhetoric, which you sort of have to have if you're in politics, particularly if you're appealing to the people as your source of support, as opposed to the special interest to bankroll your campaign.
Well, if you can't give them the money, give them a show, and there was no show better than Long. But that reminds me that some analysts of Long's career point out that while he did tax Standard Oil and had all these programs and roads, if you compare his program of the Share Our Wealth and a basic income redistribution, and he never
it was universal. It was like the universal basic income, like Andrew Yang talked about a few years ago. I think Long may have been the first American politician of any notoriety to make that idea, to bring that into the national discussion.
Yeah, but they point out that he didn't do anything like that in Louisiana. And it would have been easier for him to do it in Louisiana than, say, with the United States Congress, because he wasn't going to be able to influence. He wasn't going to be able to bully the senator from Rhode Island,
Yes, yeah, that's true. But you were saying about his program proposal, did when it was costed, did it cost less than what some of these other people were proposing? But you or something like that, you were talking about the cost of it versus other programs.
Well, I'm not sure where you're going with that.
Oh no, you were saying a minute ago how the cost of his
Oh,
program
no, I'm
compared
saying
to
that
others.
what he's proposing in terms of all this income redistribution, he doesn't do anything like that in Louisiana. With all the
Oh, really?
power he has, I mean, he could have passed anything he wanted, and he does nothing of anything that radical. Is he just holding it in reserve? Or maybe it's like, this isn't going to work. So if I actually implement this in Louisiana, people are going to know it's baloney and not make me president in 1940.
Sounds like an old politician's gimmick. Promise them the moon, and that would have been actually one of the great fun moments of American history we never got to see was be President Huey Long figuring out how to explain to the country, having elected him on a share our wealth platform, how I'm sorry y'all, but we just can't do that. But one thing I'm pretty confident of, he would have figured a way to talk his way out of it.
Oh, he would have. He would have.
He would have probably, yeah, he'd probably not only talked his way out of it, but people would have caught themselves saying, "Thank you, Mr. President." The art of the They say the art of negotiation is the ability to relieve an elephant of its tusks, and the elephant almost says "Thank you" when you're done.
Well, he was the man.
This the book is 1936, FDR's Landslide and the Triumph of the Liberal Ideal, available in all good bookstores as well as davidpietrusza.com. David, Pietrusza.com. I urge you to get it. It's an excellent read. Get it, several copies for your friends and family. And I appreciate very much, David, you giving us this time today. And we'll see y'all next time. Thank you very
You,
much,
you
everyone.